My name is Tom Kent. I'm with the Madeira Stories Live group that plans these events on behalf of the city of Madeira. So it's my pleasure to introduce you tonight, Councilman Chad Schaefer, who's going to be your host for this really interesting presentation coming up. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tom, very much. And you don't know it because it's behind the scenes, but Tom does a lot of work to make events like these happen. And let's give him one more big round of applause because I got to see it firsthand, and have to tell you, the Inclusion Committee in general has done a phenomenal job of reaching out, telling stories of various facets and aspects of our community. So I have to give them a lot of credit. We've heard a lot of great stories. We've dealt with a lot of different subjects, and I think it's been fantastic for the community and brings us all together as one community. So thank you for all the work of the Inclusion Committee. David, I see Tom. I'm probably missing some of you. You know who you are. You do wonderful work, and the Madeira Stories Live in particular has been a great add to our community here. So I think it's a testament of how many people have come out this evening to hear from our local veterans. And last year, I think Tom and I were chatting, and I said, I don't know that we've done anything with veterans. It'd be wonderful to hear from some of our local veterans that have served our country and some of their backgrounds. My family is an Air Force family, so my father was a captain in the Air Force, and my brother retired as a Chief Master Sergeant. So I grew up around military and definitely honor and respect what they do and willing to put their life on the line and sacrifice on our behalf. So I respect that very deeply. We have a great lineup this evening. We have Shane Evanshine. Did I get that correct? Sir. Thank you. He was telling me how to pronounce his name before, so I was like, I can't miss this now. We have Claire Heinzler, and we also have Paul Fasi. Paul and I coached sixth grade football together, so we have a lot of history and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into that. So last but not least, we have Paul Fasi. Paul is a graduate of West Point, started his career in the Navy. Sorry, Claire. He jumped ship. Don't. I know that's a little rivalry, right? Yeah. Anyway, Paul will tell you his story, which is called Finding My Way, An Unexpected Path. Let's welcome Paul.
Well, the last two speakers are really a hard act to follow. They really had very interesting stories. A little bit about knowing Chad and how I got roped into this is when he was running for city council, I used one of his T-shirts and I'd walk my dog all around town with the T-shirt on. So this is how I got paid back. I'm an OOG, old guy. I was born in Hartford, Connecticut. I'm the eldest of four boys. My mother was a registered nurse, and my father was a veteran who, after World War II, got into the insurance business. He enlisted in 1943 in the Army Air Corps. He had three brothers who also enlisted, and everybody came back in one piece. Two of them were sergeants in the Army, and one was a captain in the Marine Corps, who later went on to become the mayor of Honolulu. My father's a first generation, American-born Italian-American. My mother's family had been in New England for, I guess, a couple generations. We moved around a lot. When I was younger, we probably changed schools every 2 years. So it was not uncommon to go to a new school and be in a new place. We had a pretty good, I would say our family was a typical, I guess you'd say, baby boomer family. We grew up when things were pretty much more normal than they seem to be right now. I grew up thinking I was always going to be in the military. There was a draft. You either went in as a draftee or you went to college and you became an officer. And that was a fact of life in those days. So I had always thought of that. I'd planned on it. My parents were not pro-military. My father, when it came to deciding what to do with college, he said, it's your choice. It's not any, I have nothing to do with it. So I grew up and went to high school in New Jersey. We moved from Connecticut to New Jersey to Florida, back to New Jersey. Went to high school in a place called Dunellen, New Jersey, in central New Jersey. Surprisingly to me, my junior year, I found out I was in the National Honor Society. I didn't study, so I didn't really expect anything like that. I was elected co-captain of the football team. I played football. And this is where it leads into the Army and the Navy. My senior year when I was in high school, I was recruited by the Naval Academy Foundation to go to the Naval Academy. And they wanted me to go to prep school for another year because I got injured my senior year and I needed to gain some weight. And so they offered me a full scholarship to a civilian prep school in Maryland, which I took. The caveat was I had to join the Naval Reserve. And to join the Naval Reserve meant that they could appoint me from the service, which they can do probably an unlimited number of people, whereas I wouldn't have to go through my congressman. Now, at the same time, I'd applied to West Point through my congressman. Never heard anything. And that story, I guess I go back to the reason I did that is when I was about 9 years old, we used to go to the drive-in. And one time we went to the drive-in and there was a movie called The Long Gray Line. And it was old by the time I saw it, but I had to look it up. It was filmed in 1955. So you can get an idea of what the time period was. When I decided to go to prep school, I had the choice of going to civilian colleges. Every place I applied, I got into. I really wanted to go to one of the academies. The Naval Academy happened to be my second choice. So I got to prep school. I was playing football on a prep school team, and we played college freshman teams. We only lost one game, and that was to the Navy freshmen. We beat the Army freshmen. And most of the kids that were playing there were going on to college. This was like maybe a junior college where people would go to junior college before they go into another school and matriculate at a major university. A lot of the people there went on to play at Syracuse, Maryland, Ohio State, and other places like that. Myself, I got the appointment to the Naval Academy probably in November. I was all set to go. And I went home for Christmas, got back, and back to school, and I found out my parents called me and said, our congressman wants to interview you. And so I said, okay. So I went to the interview. The head of the interview committee was a coach in the conference I played in. And he said, how come you applied? And I said, well, I didn't apply this year. I applied last year. I never heard anything. And he went and he looked. He said, well, we lost your packet. And I said, okay, thanks you. And I went through the interview, and I got back, and about 2 weeks later, I got an appointment to the military academy. So that had been what I'd always wanted to do. And I went back. I told the headmaster at the school I was going to go to West Point, not Annapolis. And then I went home, and I still had to do my Naval Reserve duty. And so that required me to take a cruise for 2 weeks on a destroyer escort in the Great Lakes. And by the way, I went to boot camp at Great Lakes in Wisconsin. It wasn't anything as I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be more like the Army boot camp or the Marine Corps, like Army's a little watered down version of the Marine Corps. But I figured the Navy would be something like that, but it wasn't really at all. We didn't handle a weapon, and we didn't do anything I thought that was military other than learn how to survive on a fire on a ship. And so I was fortunate to be able to visit the Naval Academy several times, which kind of made me want to really go to West Point as opposed to the Naval Academy. And so I went to West Point. We have to report. You report to West Point on Monday, the first Monday in July. So we reported there, and they had the first 8 weeks is called their boot camp's called Beast Barracks, and Beast Barracks is where they really tear you down. We started with 1,135 cadets, new cadets, and we graduated 739. So there was a big attrition. Most of it was in the first year. While I was there, the Vietnam War was going on. Okay. It didn't really end until 75, 76. I don't know if they really know when it ended. The interesting thing about being there was the officers, all of our professors were officers. We had 1 or 2 civilian people. Most of them had graduated. All of them had been to Vietnam at least once. And I'd have to say that more than half of them didn't think we should have been there. So I was there at a time when maybe we shouldn't have been there. I think we probably shouldn't have been there myself. While I was there, my father was going to protest in the town at the same football field that I played football at. And I understood that. I didn't have a problem with that. The thing is maybe when the other speaker had talked about this was that I remember going to San Francisco between the summer of my sophomore year. I was wearing an Army green uniform. The cadets have an Army green uniform. It looks like an officer's uniform, except they have blacked out bars for lieutenants or captains. And I remember just getting off the bus in San Francisco after taking a flight, a space available flight to Travis Air Force Base. I got off the bus and 2 guys came over and spit on me. They said, so I kind of have that feeling when people say, thank you for your service. It's kind of like I go, well, I think there's a lot of people that still feel badly that when they were in, they weren't even told welcome home. I didn't feel that way. I was fortunate. I graduated learning how to fight a guerrilla warfare and then got sent to Germany. They did not send anybody in our class to Vietnam. I think a couple of people had to volunteer to go, and they did go. But before I graduated, I'd been accepted in flight school. So the caveat with that was I had to spend 1 year on a troop leading assignment as a platoon leader or the equivalent. And so I had to spend 1 year in Germany as a platoon leader, and 1 year to the day, I came back and went to flight school. My first half was in Texas. The second half was in Fort Rucker, Alabama. The whole thing is now in Fort Rucker. Interesting story. You mentioned Oktoberfest. I went to Oktoberfest. It was a lot of fun. This will date me, I also went to the 72 Olympics. So that was interesting because I left just before the stuff hit the fan. Once I got to flight school, in the old days when you went to West Point, you had to go into a combat arm. There were 6 combat arms. You had to be armor, infantry, field artillery, air defense artillery, Corps of Engineers, or Signal Corps. And now it's pretty wide open. They can graduate and go into any type of job they want. You can actually go to medical school now. They didn't have a medical school path when I was there. So I went to flight school, I graduated, and because of my branch, I was an armor officer. And in Germany, I was in a ground cavalry unit. They needed 5 armor officers in Hawaii. And the reason was they had an air cavalry unit there, which was a helicopter-borne unit that pretty much performed like a cavalry unit did, but treetop one. So I went to Hawaii. I actually did very well in the military. I really had a good time. But one of the things that really bothered me, I'd have to say, after I had a couple bad experiences with some senior officers, not that it reflected badly on me, but I just thought they shouldn't have been there. And that is one of the problems that you face if you're in the military. And I think things are getting straightened out in the military right now. But in those days, you had people that were going to be promoted that had to have their ticket punched, meaning they had to be put in a position of leadership, whether they earned it or deserved it. If they didn't get it, they wouldn't get promoted. And the promotion was based pretty much along the lines of what you could do and what you couldn't do. One of the things I learned, though, is dealing with people. You know, one of the things that I learned was that when you're an officer in the military, and in the Army, at least from my point of view, I had about 40 people that reported to me. They came from all roles, all socioeconomic places, lived from different parts. We had people from the inner city in New York. We had people that were good old boys on the farm. And, you know, during that period in Germany in the 70s, drugs were a big problem. The military now has drug testing. They didn't have drug testing in those days. So one of the things that I found myself doing that I didn't expect to do when I got there was that there had to be an officer going through the company area at least before midnight and after midnight. So every week, somebody different, every day of every week, one of the 4 or 5 officers, which would include me, would have to go in and inspect the barracks to make sure they were killing each other. And I can tell you this, there wasn't one time that I didn't go through the barracks and go through all the rooms where there could be between 4 people or 8 people in a room, where I didn't have to bust somebody for drugs. And I learned how to read you your rights, you know, just like the police had to do. And we had to do that. We had to confiscate materials. And usually you didn't end up arresting anybody because it was always in a common area in a room. We walked in one day in a room with a card table that was probably a foot high with hashish wrapped up in foil. And you couldn't really do anything about it in those days. You could drive from Germany, where I was based, and you could go to Amsterdam, and you get to one of the traffic circles outside of Amsterdam, there's people selling pot right there. It was not against the law in Holland or Netherlands. So I found myself in a situation where I really enjoyed the camaraderie and the fellowship with the officers and with the men. And I was in an aviation unit. I had about 7 or 8 pilots working for me. I had about 20 or 30 enlisted men. And it was really rewarding to be able to help people in those days. But I didn't really like it. I was nominated to be the aide-de-camp of the general of the division, the assistant division commander. I turned it down. I decided I didn't want to be in the Army anymore. But I ended up resigning. I got an honorable discharge. So I wanted to go into business. And when I say an unexpected path, it was an unexpected path, because usually you're expected to stay in the military for at least 20 years. Well, when you graduate from an academy or a ROTC program and you're a regular Army officer, as I was, you owe them 5 years. I owed them a couple more months because I went to flight school. But that's only 5 of 20. You're really committed for 20 years. And they can call you up for 20 years. And I have a story about one of my business partners. One of my early business partners was another graduate, Japanese guy. And I went over to his house one day for a meeting, and he's running around with his head cut off. He's looking for everything. And I said, "What happened?" He said, "They called me up. This was Desert Storm." And he was just 2 years away from being at the 20-year mark, and I was just 1 year after. And he said, "Well, don't be too happy. They might call you." So I decided at that point that I wanted to be in the civilian sector, but I have always kept touch with my classmates. I mean, I probably know all 739 of my classmates. That's one thing about West Point. And one of the things that is true about that is that you're associated with people who stay in, and you still have a contact with the military. And I kind of feel like our country has lost contact with that idea of service because there's such a small percentage now. I mean, the draft didn't work, but there's such a small percentage now of people that know what really happens. I mean, it's not some mystery. They're just like the people in Madeira. I mean, you've got people in Madeira, you've got people in Cincinnati that you've got young troops that can't afford to buy food for their family. I mean, some of these people can't afford it. So I made my way into the civilian sector. I was recruited because I graduated from West Point by big companies. I went to tell my uncle, who was the mayor of Honolulu, that, and he said, well, why don't you stay here? He said, you can work for me. He was running for governor. And he said, but I'll tell you, if I win, I'm not going to hire you for any job. And if I lose, you're not going to work for the city and county of Honolulu either. So I did that for 2 years. It was a great experience. I learned a lot more about the people in Hawaii, and there's a lot of people that are middle class and lower middle class that live in Hawaii. How they make a living and how they can afford to be there is another story. But I did that, and then I decided I was going to go into another field, and I got hired by Hewlett Packard. I became one of their technical sales reps, field engineer they called it, but it was really a sales rep. So those were the days when there was no software. I mean, now you got on my phone, there's more power on this phone probably than an IBM 364 or something like that. We had computer programming at West Point using cards. And the worst thing you could do is stick those cards in the card puncher, and it chewed them up. And then you had to redo them all again. And it was not easy coloring those cards in. So I was involved. I became one of the top salespeople in the company. I got recruited by one of my customers. He wanted me to run a software company. I did that for a little while. I started working with this other class, not a classmate, but somebody who had actually been an enlisted man and then gone to West Point after being in Vietnam. He was Japanese American. He actually grew up in Germany. Spoke English as his third language, and the only way you could tell that he didn't understand English that well was if you told him a joke that was a play on words, and he'd look to see if anybody else was laughing. So that actually helped me because I was started to work in Asia with him. I'd take customers over to Japan. We were hired by venture capital companies in Silicon Valley to find Japanese strategic partners. We did very well. The last deal I worked on was a company called Egghead Software. They used to have little offices or little stores that sold software and computer paraphernalia. And we sold that to SoftBank. I ran into somebody in Singapore. He introduced himself, got in an elevator, looked at me, and he said, I could tell by your suit you're an American. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, well, that's kind of hard. He was an Indian American, and he was wearing a suit. So to make a long story short, that led me into getting into the healthcare business, which is what I do now. From there, I went to a wedding 6 months later, went to see this guy in his office. His boss, who owned the company, was an MD, PhD. He owned a lab that did PCR tests. This was back in the early 90s. was the height of HIV, and they were doing business hand over fist because people were getting tested using PCR, DNA testing for HIV. And they were also getting tested to see if any of the cures that they had would reduce the viral load in the blood. So they were doing a great business on that. He wanted to buy a lab in Asia, and that's what he hired me to do. I went to Asia. Nobody had a lab that he would buy because they might do $1 million in business. They'd have 50 people who weren't part of the lab, and they all wanted $1 million for the business. So I ended up setting up a lab and finding partners and strategic partners in Asia, which led to me having to set the lab up when I found out nobody else was free to set it up. So I set up a company in Singapore, set up a relationship with a company in India, started the first U.S. standards lab in India, which is now the largest lab in India, and started another one in Malaysia. From there, went into diagnostic products for kits for rapid tests for HIV and malaria. And then I worked for Stanford, helped them reorganize their labs. And I went to work for Johns Hopkins and was in charge of all the labs that they had in hospitals affiliated outside the country. Johns Hopkins has hospital affiliates all over the world. And so I was in charge of their labs, plus setting up new labs. And finally, I went to China from there, where I was working when my family moved here. I was very blessed in 2014, even at my age, to have a kid. And here I was 20 years after I thought I was too old to do it. In 2014, I now have an 11-year-old son who's in the 6th grade. He plays football with Mason. He loves football. So we've been here. We moved here because of, she was on relocation. I was in Shanghai. She looked and she just loved the town. And we found a house, some builder had torn down one of the old houses on our street. We live on South Timber Lane, and built a new house. So I saw pictures with TVEC on the walls and dirt, all torn up and everything. And I got back to finally see it before it was finished. And we moved from Sammamish, Washington, in Washington State, to Madeira. And we really like it. We love it. I went from California to the Seattle area. I used to love California. I lived in San Francisco in the city for 8 years. And it was wonderful, but it's a mess. So it wasn't hard for me to come to Ohio. I'd been here a couple of times before with my wife. This is her 3rd time at Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati. And I really can't say too much about what a nice town Madeira is and how good the people are. There's probably no safer place, I think, to bring up a family. And with that, I'll end. I hope that I wasn't too disjointed, but the military was very good to me. I still have a lot of good friends who are retired, mostly. Some are still contract work for the military and the government. But that's my story, and my unexpected path was probably the most unexpected was having a kid at my age. But I have to go back and say that I really wanted to have one, and it happened at the right time.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your service. And we're certainly glad all of you moved to Madeira. So you all enrich our community very much. So I'm going to turn things back over to Tom, and he's going to wrap us up for this evening. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. It's been a great evening. I love the 3 stories. They were great. I want to point out that I counted at least 5 former storytellers in the room. So if you would just stand up if you were a former storyteller at one of our events, Wave your hand. Yeah, right. Yeah, thank you. I particularly want to tell you that we are blessed to have Allie, one of our former storytellers, who has brought food for us tonight. So when we're done here, turn right around and go back to the table where she's standing, and she's got some really great stuff there. So I suggest you do that. If you're sitting by a questionnaire and a survey, I appreciate if you'd fill it out. It helps us plan our events. And if you want to tell a story at a future event, be sure to note that down. And the last thing I want to tell you is that the next Madeira Stories Live will be March 12th of next year. And we're going to repeat a topic that Jan Smith was part of last year, Blast from the Past, where we're going to hear stories about old Madeira. So look forward to that on March 12th. So finally, to the veterans here, thank you for your service, but mostly I want to say, well.